Well, hello again, and welcome back to our virtual class on fly fishing here in Tennessee. My name is Jeb Beasley. I am the East Tennessee field rep for Tennessee Wildlife Federation. Joining us on the call again tonight is Mr. Sean Austin. Sean is one of our good volunteers, hunt masters that helps us out with the Hunting and Fishing Academy program. He's going to take a little bit more time to follow up on this class, some of the things that we talked about last time, but also we're going to take a little bit deeper look into some more specific skill sets and things like that that should help you guys be a little bit more successful in your fly fishing adventure. So, Sean, you want to take just a quick second and just introduce yourself again, and we'll get going.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you guys for being here. I started fly fishing about 18 years ago and started off slow and had no clue what I was doing, but kind of gradually got it. And once it clicked, I really just fell in love with it. Ended up guiding out west for a number of years. And now I'm back here in East Tennessee doing some work for the NRCS and some other things. So still fly fishing, still loving it. I got to get out on the Tennessee River this weekend and had a great time doing that. But I'm very passionate about all things outdoors, but fly fishing definitely has a special place in my heart, and I'm glad to be here sharing with you guys today.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. So thanks again to everybody who joined the first Fly Fishing 101 class that we did a few weeks ago. Just in case you missed it, during that class, we discussed some of the different types of species that are commonly pursued by fly fishermen. We talked about the essential gear that you needed to get started, and then also some locations across the state that you might be interested in going and trying those spots out for fly fishing. So again, tonight we're going to be taking a little bit deeper look into some of those things. We're going to be talking about some entomology. Also, Sean's going to be sharing with us just some overall, different fishing tactics that are going to hopefully help you guys be more successful on the river. So we don't have quite as much material tonight as we did in that last class. We really want to make sure that we're having enough time to answer y'all's questions. So we're going to try to wrap up our material a little bit quicker than last time because we want to hear from y'all. Again, this is meant to be interactive. We can't see you guys, but we do have the ability to answer your questions. Taylor Martin, our program manager, is also on the call. So I'm going to let him talk for just a second on how to ask questions, and then we'll jump right into the material tonight.
Hey everybody, like Jeb said, my name is Taylor Martin. I'm the manager for the Hunting and Fishing Academy. So once again, thank you all for spending your Tuesday evening with us to learn a little bit more about fly fishing. I see a lot of familiar names in the participants list, so thank you all for the ones who've been joining multiple of these. So if you've been on one of these before, you kind of know the spiel that I'm about to go through. But like Jeb said, we cannot see you. Your cameras are off and your mics are muted. So feel free to do what you need and talk to whoever might be in the room. It won't bother us any. But in order for this to be interactive, there's two ways that you can interact with us. One is the chat box. You can go in there if you just have general things to say or resources you'd like to share with just the panelists or the whole group. You can put that in the chat feature. And then for questions, there's a Q&A feature. If you go to the bottom of your toolbar in Zoom, you'll see that Q&A. That's the best way to ask us your questions. Type your question in there and we'll see it pop up, and we'll either answer it right then or we'll hold it to when we get to the end and start taking everybody's questions. So if you have a question pop into your mind, go ahead and type it in that Q&A function so we're sure to answer it. But with that, I will hand it back over to Jeb and Sean.
All right, thanks, Taylor. Just before we jump into tonight's material, one of the things we always like to do, just in case you're new to the Federation, is give just a real quick overview. Tennessee Wildlife Federation was founded back in 1946 as one of the oldest and largest nonprofits dedicated just towards conservation and sound management of Tennessee's great outdoors and our natural resources. So our work covers a very broad area, including policy work, habitat restoration, and youth engagement. There's a ton of ways to get involved with our federation, whether that be taking action on current issues or volunteering with one of our many programs. So if you're interested in getting involved with us, check out that link at tnwf.org/get-involved. And like I said, that we do have several programs. One of them being the Scholastic Clay Target program that has about 1,700 kids participating in the shotgun shooting sports. Hunters for the Hungry, if you're a deer hunter, you probably recognize that logo there. It feeds Tennesseans by providing venison to hunger relief organizations, and all of that venison is donated by Tennessee hunters. So that's a really great program to get involved in if you're not already doing so. And then also the Hunting and Fishing Academy. And that's why we're here tonight. And that is the program that I work with specifically. So what is the Hunting and Fishing Academy all about? Well, it's designed and it's intended to be a means to reverse the trend of the decline of hunters and anglers across the country, especially here in Tennessee. And our goal is to be creating new hunters, creating new anglers, and getting more folks involved in the outdoors so that they're continuing to buy license, they're continuing to contribute to conservation. And our main focus is always going to be safety, education, and conservation. We want to be creating ethical sportsmen that are safe, that are knowledgeable, and that are passionate about conservation. And we know not everybody grew up in a hunting family. If you're like me, that's just what you did. But some people, they didn't have that background growing up. And so they're trying to get involved with it for the first time. And we like to think that our program is a really good first stepping stone to build kind of a good foundation for people to get started in the outdoors. And part of that is doing these virtual classes. And if you've been participating with us, you kind of know the structure of how these work. But if this is your first time, thanks again for being with us tonight. Specifically, we're on the topic of fly fishing again. We're going to be talking about some basic entomology, one, what that means, but also how you can apply that to being a more successful fly fisherman. We're going to be talking about how to select the right fly, and then also just some general fishing tactics. Again, this is going to be pretty broad, pretty open, but we're going to try to do our best to keep this material a little bit shorter tonight so we can answer your questions. We'll answer a few as we go through the material, but towards the end, we're going to have time just focused to answering y'all's questions. So feel free to go ahead and ask those as we go. We can find good places to address them as we move through the material tonight. But also, again, we're going to have a lot of time built in at the end of this class just for questions. So be sure to stick around and participate in those as well. So when we talk about entomology, what does that mean? If you're like me, that wasn't a term that was thrown around a whole lot when we were out on the lake or in the John boat or whatever. So really all it means is it's the study of insects. And when we talk about insects, we're talking about two types really, is terrestrial insects. These are insects that spend their life above the surface of the water on land. And those are things like ants, crickets, grasshoppers. Then there's also aquatic insects. And those insects spend most of their life beneath the surface of the water, especially those early stages of life from egg. And then once they hatch, that's all happening beneath the surface of the water. We're going to be talking about a couple different types of aquatic insects here in just a minute. Sean's going to break down a lot of that stuff for us. But it's important to know why is entomology important? And the biggest reason is that insects, they serve as a very important food source for all kinds of fish, and especially trout. When you're thinking about fly fishing, that's what most people have on their brain is trout. So these insects that we talk about tonight are very, very important food sources for these fish. And knowing what time of year they're hatching, knowing, what the fish are feeding on specifically is going to help you hopefully land more fish because you know what they're actively feeding on. It just, again, increases our odds of being more successful. It's also just a unique skill set that makes fly fishing more rewarding. If you talk to enough people that have been fly fishermen or they've fly fished for, any number of years, you're going to hear them talk about a lot of these terms that we're talking about tonight. So we're going to try to go through this, break these things down in a way that makes sense, and then also just answer y'all's questions as they come up. It's important to note too, you don't need to be an expert in any of these things to be successful, but just knowing these few little things that we're going to talk about tonight should just boost your odds of catching more fish in the long run. And that's what our goal is just kind of give you a basic understanding. You don't need to be an expert in order to be successful. So now I'm going to be quiet. Sean, he's going to kind of kick us off. He's going to walk us through some of the different types of aquatic insects that we have here in Tennessee. It is important to note that Tennessee is the most biodiverse inland state in the country. So we could spend so much more time talking about all the different types of creepy crawlies that you can find here in the state. But we're going to focus on just a few tonight. We're going to look at some aquatic species first, but also some terrestrials that are common food sources for fish of all kinds. So I'm going to let Sean kind of take it from here. And then we'll, like I said, if you have questions, feel free to ask them as we go, and we'll find time to answer them throughout. So Sean, you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. We'll go ahead and jump to the next one. Thank you, Jeb. So entomology, study of bugs. I took a couple classes, but I'm by no means an expert. But that's part of fly fishing. Once you get into it, you kind of, because you want to catch more fish, or because you just enjoy being out there learning about the fish, you start picking up on these things. That buzzing thing flying around your head doesn't become an annoyance, it becomes a clue. So, eyes, ears open. Mayflies are a huge food source for a lot of different fish. There's mayflies, betas. There's well over 140 species, different species. They can be different colors. They can range from, a dark brown, almost black, to, a green, to, almost an olive blue. A lot of different shapes and sizes. We're coming up. Temperatures are rising. We're getting to the point now to where we should be anticipating a hatch on the Tennessee River within a week or so. Might be later, might be sooner, but just because I call them mayflies doesn't mean they all hatch in May. And this is an example of a fly that spends most of its life cycle underneath the water, submerged as a larva nymph. And there's a little picture on these main flies, these main aquatic flies that we're going to run through first, of them in adult stage and then them in more of a nymphal stage. So fish love them, but during both times. I mean, when they hatch, they're only flying around for 24 or 48 hours. They don't live long once they kind of move to that adult life cycle. But they're busy, and when they hatch, they can hatch pretty thick. Up and down the Tennessee River, it'll be very thick, so thick that in the evenings, clouds of these things will just kind of swarm around the banks. And it's one of my favorite times to fish the Tennessee River, because you can catch catfish, bass, brim, golden shiners, perch. I mean, you can catch anything on a dry fly. All right, so caddisflies, just like the mayflies, caddisflies, there's a lot of different species of them. One of their fly representations for different life stages is right here. So we've got on the bottom here, that's an elk hair caddis. And then the top two will be representations of them in their nymphal stage. But this isn't exactly what it would look like. This is a closer, accurate representation. Let me see if I can hold it up there for you guys. So this one, the adult stage, it's meant to be a dry fly. It'll float. Let's see if you can get that. So it's got hackle and then this elk hair. Both are going to help it stay riding above the water. And then these two would be fished below the water surface. Okay, and they can be this size. You can fish smaller, you can fish larger, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I just wanted to show that representation of flies that you can use to kind of mimic that. All right, stone flies. We don't have a whole lot of stone flies, but we do have them, especially if you get lucky and get to go up to the Smokies, or if you live in that area. There are some golden stones up there, and this is a big meal. I mean, this is a Big Mac. This is a Big Mac for trout in particular. Smallmouth will eat them as well if they have the opportunity. Just about anything can. I mean, you can see that on what looks to be that guy's thumb. It's a big bug. So the fish are going to eat these, and trout will eat just about anything once just to try it. Maybe that's why I can catch them. I don't know, but they'll try anything just about once. And once, if there is a big hatch on some of the smaller streams in the Smokies, they'll really key in on them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a fish the exact size. That's what I recommend. Try starting out similar size, similar color, all that. But sometimes when they're eating Big Macs, maybe they want something smaller. Maybe they want, you know, several sizes smaller than what's actually coming off and hatching. You just got to kind of play around with it. But that's a very important food source, especially in the rivers that are in the Smokies. Very, very effective fly to fish just about anywhere because it's a big bug. I mean, it's, you know, fish have to eat to live, and if they get something big and juicy like that drifted in front of them, they might just bite it, even if they've never seen it before, even if it's not in that river system. But like Jeb said, we've got one of the most biodiverse areas in the country. I mean, as far as inland states, we're number one, and it's kind of daunting because you can't really target in and have one little fly box. Once you get going, you'll just want more and more flies, more and more boxes. But this is just some basics just to get you guys started. So we'll jump to the next one. All right, dragonflies and damselflies. There is a difference. Dragonflies, like this picture here, they're gonna, when they're resting, when they're, you know, perched on something, their wings are gonna be more than likely outright. They're not gonna be folded up. Damselflies, their wings will be folded up, and their wings are gonna be, you know, pretty much the same size front and back. Whereas dragonflies will be a little different. These can be awesome flies to fish, really fun. You can fish, you know, the nymphal stage. You can fish a dry fly representation of a dragonfly or a damselfly, and it's great for trout. It's great for bass. It's great for brim. The larva or nymphal stage is great for carp. And Jeb, I'm going to throw another fly up here. And this fly, I did not tie this. This has got some really unique tubing on it. But if you go to a local fly shop, they'll probably have something similar to this. This fly is deadly on carp. Okay, and it's great for ponds. It's great for brim. It's an all around fish getter. So yeah, just because it's a big insect doesn't mean that the fish aren't gonna swallow it up. So definitely pay attention. If you see a big and a lot of blue damselflies out on a pond, and that's what the fish are going after, you know, it could be well worth it to tie one on and just see what those fish will do about it. All right, here we go. So these eggs, will the fish eat the eggs? Yes, they will. Do they know that they're eating the eggs all the time? I'm not sure. You can see brim, you can see trout even, just every now and then they'll just swallow what looks to us like algae or moss. Whether that's because there's a lot of eggs in there, or whether it's because the nymphs are loaded in there, or whether it's because they just want to bite it and see if there's any goodies in there, I don't know. But we don't really use flies that represent the eggs because these eggs are so tiny. We mainly focus on these nymph, larval, pupa, and adult stages. Let me get a little representation here of some pupa and even a little annelid. So if it looks like these flies are small, I'll try to get that in focus. It's because they are. And this will be a little annelid or a red pupa. The small pupa and some of these smaller flies in general, you're going to have to size down and really, really kind of, it seems strange that you would catch a fish on a size 20, 22, which is a really small fly. But some of the biggest fish I've caught have been on small flies like that. And that's mostly speaking in terms of trout. Bass, I don't typically go small like that. Brim, I don't typically go that small either. But when it comes to trout on tailwaters, which is a water below a dam, where you're getting a lot of the midges, they look like a small mosquito, and that's got a long, not necessarily a long cycle, but you'll have a lot of pupa and you'll have a lot of larval in the water, and then that's when you got to go small because that's what those fish are keyed in on. Big fish, they've got to eat. If they're not eating big things, they've got to eat a lot of small things, which means they're eating all day long. So it's just because you're not catching them doesn't mean that they're not eating. They've got to eat. Sometimes they are turned off, but other times you've just got to play around and see what it is. And if you can watch the fish, last episode we kind of touched on the polarized glasses. If you can watch the fish kind of look into the water and see them, if you can pick them out, you can watch and you'll just see them open their mouth every now and then. A lot of times you can't see what they're feeding on underneath the water, but if they're doing it often enough, you know, well, that's probably not something big. That's probably something smaller. And like I said, you can talk to locals at the fly shop, go in there, seek advice, kind of do some research online, or politely ask somebody on the river. Most people are pretty giving with information, especially if they're walking out as you're walking in, or something along those lines. Just be courteous to them, and it doesn't hurt to ask for some local advice. All right, so other common food sources. Trout are opportunistic feeders. You know, we, as fly fishermen, women, we've kind of put them on a pedestal, but they're as opportunistic as bass. They'll eat anything once. I mean, they'll eat mice, they'll eat moss floating down the river every now and then. They'll eat crayfish, they'll eat other fish. They'll eat just about anything that won't eat them. But they'll definitely key in on certain things. And that's why entomology, kind of paying attention to the bugs, is such a big deal. And it's not to say that you can't throw a fly that looks nothing like what's ever been in that river before and catch a fish. Sometimes that's the way to go. You know, people are kind of, you know, they're wise. These fish have a lot of competition. They get a lot of pressure sometimes, and between the pressure and competition, they get that hook in their mouth, and they kind of wise up. So, you know, maybe throwing something new or bright, shiny, sparkly, USA colored fly, whatever, isn't always a bad idea. But they'll eat just about anything that won't eat them. All right, leeches and annelids. So annelids, just really any worm. Fly fishermen typically refer to annelids as worms that are in the water, and they're not going to turn into anything other than that worm. Leeches, most people know what leeches are, but the leeches are a parasite. They're also a great food source for trout and bass and brim, and really any fish swimming in water with leeches. Leeches are packed full of protein. That's a big hearty snack for a fish. And you can have flies that represent leeches. I've got two here that I'll show you. One's a little micro leech. It's a little small leech. Okay, and that's just some hair that kind of flows in the water, gives it action like a leech would be swimming. And then here's a big leech. All right, and this big leech can be used for trout. It can be used for bass. Little big for brim, but the micro leeches are excellent for brim. All right, we'll keep moseying along. All right, and then this is more getting into our terrestrials. So these insects, everything needs water, but they don't need water as part of their life cycle. They don't need to be in the water to make it to adulthood. So grasshoppers, crickets, these can be very fun flies to fish. I mean, they're great live bait, but it's really fun to fish these flies. Typically, you're going to fish these on top of the water. I've got a little example here of some flies that represent more grasshoppers than anything. And you can get them big, you can get them small. You can get them made out of foam or just mostly thread and feathers. I do like when I'm throwing big terrestrials, I like to make sure they don't have to have legs on them, but I really like legs. I think legs add a lot just to that profile. That fish is looking up and it sees those legs. And as that fly, if you move a little bit, those legs often kind of breathe or bend, and it looks really realistic. And it's just a great fun way to catch fish. Bass will also go after the big hoppers. brim will annihilate them. I mean, it's a lot of fun seeing that fish break the surface of the water to eat one of those bigger bugs. All right, ants and beetles. So both these are black on this picture here. We've got ants of all different sizes, shapes, and colors in the state. So, a red ant, that could work. Black ant with a red head, that could work. Black body with red legs coming off. I mean, the fish aren't gonna study all the bugs as much as we are gonna study them. Like I said, they're opportunistic, but just kind of paying attention to what's out there. And it's fun to throw them every now and then. I mean, even if you don't see fish eating these particular bugs, if they're rising, meaning they're coming to the surface, whether it be the brim, bluegill, trout, whatever, if they're coming up to the surface to kind of slurp, eat some of these bugs, then try an ant if you got an ant. Try a beetle if you've got a beetle. I've got a little representation here, and both these are black too. Not black's a good color to go by. It gives it a good silhouette. So this one right here is my ant, and this poofy thing up top is it's just a non-absorbent fiber, and I put that on these flies just so I can see them better. Because a black fly, especially low light, farther away from you, you're not going to be able to see it all that great as it's floating just barely above the surface of the water. But this little poofy thing, sometimes I'll tie them with orange. You can buy them with orange, neon, what have you. It's a post, and that's more for you, a sight indicator for you, so you know where your fly's at. And then this guy, a friend of mine gave me this, but it's more a representation of a fly than a beetle, I would say. A beetle, it could pass as a beetle for sure. It could also, I'd probably go a little bit bigger, but depending on where you're at in the state, you might have already heard the cicadas, and that's a big hatch that's going on, and fish are going to be keen into that too. I mean, that's a big steak. That's a big steak for a fish. So they're going to key in on the cicadas. Carp are an excellent species to target on the fly. They'll probably key into the cicadas. Trout will, bass will. I mean, every fish is opportunistic. Nothing's too picky to pass up a meal if they're hungry. So it's just kind of pay attention to the bugs out there, and once you kind of get in the habit of that, you'll start really. I don't know. Some people might not be passionate about it, but it'll give you a purpose to stare and look at a bug for a little bit, and also every now and then turning over a rock or something in the river. Just be careful when you're doing that, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But we'll go ahead and jump to the next one, Jed. All right. So let me move this. We've talked a little bit about fly selection, but your target species. That's got a lot to do with the flies, but also size. If I'm going to target something big, like say a striped bass in the Tennessee River, I'm not going to target them with one of those little tiny flies I showed you that won't even cover your pinky nail. I'll probably use something a little bit bigger, say like this leech, maybe even bigger than that, a big streamer like this. Just something more in his category. I mean, match the hatch, and if you're fishing, say below a dam on the Tennessee River, that hatch might be skipjack, or gizzard chat. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a bug, but when we're talking in terms of trout in particular, the bugs play a big role in that. Water conditions. A lot of times, if the water's really murky, really cold, you might not see fish coming up. If it's cold, you might not have a lot of hatches. Something's hatching almost every month out of the year. It might not be a big hatch like we have, as the days get longer and warmer, but something's going on, and it might not even be above the water. It could just be, those nymphs, those bugs that are submerged underneath the water. They might just be shifting. they might be shifting because, time of year, temperature in the river. It just, kind of pay attention to that and kind of search them out. Time of year, it's definitely a big one. Cold versus warm, long days versus short days. A lot of your aquatic bugs are gonna have their hatches. They can have them early in the morning. They can have them later in the evening. Some of them hatch at night, but typically it's going to be when it's a little bit cooler and when you've got a little bit more moisture. So if say a storm rolls in, it's a great time to watch out for a hatch. And a lot of hatches are typically it's not on the exact day every year, but they're pretty close. So keeping that journal like we discussed in the first series, just every time you go out, write what you saw, what you caught it on. Take note of the bug life. Take note of maybe you saw mayflies. Write that date down, and that can kind of help you plan your future trips for that following year. And it'll really kind of get you thinking in the mind of, okay, this hatch is going to happen then. I need to make sure that I've got some sort of fly that'll represent that bug. And yeah, just kind of keep your head up. And I know it's hard. You're supposed to be focusing on the fish and the fishing aspect of it, but you can take a break every now and then, or just look as you're walking in, walking out, and pick up on the cues the bugs are giving you. All right. So we touched a little bit on panfish, but panfish are very opportunistic. Just about anything that won't eat them, they'll eat it. It could be a service dry fly. It could be the cicada, the ant. It could be a popper, something with more action. It could be a big fly, a big nymph. I've got here a representation of some nymphs. I want to show you guys. A bigger stone down at the bottom there. And most of my nymphs that I fish are a brown, a gray, a brown, or black. I fish nymphs that are pink and red and green. Green's a great color. Olive's a great color, but I've fished some crazy colors just to do it, and some days it works, some days it doesn't. But nymphs that you use for flies will be deadly for trout will be deadly for your panfish as well. And you can fish them below a cork like this, and a strike indicator, bobber. Most fly fishermen don't call them bobbers. It's a strike indicator or something of that sort. But yeah, it can be deadly on them in a lake, a pond, whatever. So jump to the bass picture. Smallmouth are awesome. They're awesome to catch on any tackle. They're one of my favorite bass species. But one thing that they key in on big in throughout the Tennessee River and some of the same rivers that we're lucky enough to have trout in, and these smallmouth, are crayfish patterns, or crayfish themselves. So this pattern here is tied to resemble a crayfish, and it's articulated, meaning that it's got jointed sections, and that's just to let it breathe. So I'm going to tie it on this end here, and as it's pulled through the water, it'll kind of breathe up and out, and it's got that kind of teardrop profile to make it look like the pinchers of this crayfish are in front as it's swimming away, because it kind of swim backwards. And this fly can be extremely deadly on both trout and bass. And it's a new favorite of mine. And there's patterns that look just like the crayfish themselves. This is kind of more of a creature interpretation, but it's extremely effective. And then also a minnow type streamer. This one's tied more to resemble a little trout, but like I said, a lot of times you can find smallmouth. They might be in the lower sections of some of the rivers in the state than the trout are, but you could use this fly for both trout and the bass. All right, big brown trout. So brown trout, they're predators. I mean, all trout are, but they're looked at as being more predatory than most species that we have. They can get pretty big in the state, and a lot of people target them on these big streamers. They'll throw big streamers. You can catch them on tiny nymphs, though. Like I was saying, these little tiny guys that are, no bigger than the size of, I mean, you could probably fit 3 of them on your pinky nail. You can catch big browns on that. It's just browns are a little bit different in the way that they feed. Rainbows, it's kind of our staple here in the state. They're all stocked. We do have some streams that have wild, not native, but wild rainbows. So there's a few areas that you can catch those wild fish, but they feed a little differently. The brown trout will oftentimes, be more predatory, feed more towards low light or dark, but they're out there and you can catch them just about any time. All right, so instead of running through more tactics, I really want to hear from y'all, answer some questions, and then if we get crickets, I'll keep going on tactics and whatnot. But yeah, now's the time to fire away.
So we do have our first question tonight, thanks to Britt. It's not necessarily directly related to fly selection, but I think it still works. They ask, when beginning my cast using larger flies, the line is always herky-jerky, which I think is a good way of describing it, because I know exactly what you're talking about. In spite of trying different leader sizes / lengths, they can't get a tight loop after, or they can get a tight loop after a few false casts, but starting out, it's pretty ugly. Any suggestions on what to do with that, especially with a lot of those larger flies that you
showed, herky jerky. I really like that description. That nails it. So a lot of these bigger flies like this one, it is a big fly, but it's actually very light. Since I do not like the herky jerkies myself, I try to throw, when I get to my bigger flies, especially since I'm going to be throwing a lot all throughout the day, I typically tie a much or buy a much lighter fly with a large profile, and I'll use that sink tip line. And what that sink tip line does, it's heavy. I mean, it's a solid line towards the end. So all of the line that you're going to be casting, okay, is going to be that sink tip line. So with that weight of the line and decreased weight of the fly, it's a lot more fluid, and you kind of get away from the herky jerkies on that end. If you're trying to cast a big fly that you're not wanting to run sink tip line on, like a mouse, just it's a lot more to do with your timing than it is the fly. If you can get away from the fly weight, say like there's a fly called a Sculptzilla, or there's some flies with big solid tungsten cone heads or big beads. Maybe they're wrapped with lead wire, more towards the eye of the hook. Those flies are going to be really heavy, and it's just you've got to practice that timing and get that timing down. But something like this, even though it's a big fly, it's very light, and you could still throw a mouse like this on a 5 weight. It's just there again, it's just a little bit more to do with timing. You might have to pause a little bit more because it's going to drag. It's got a lot of surface area, so you might have to pause a little bit more on your stops. But it's just all about timing. And like I said, I try to get away from those big heavy heads when I can. Sometimes you can't, and you got to deal with a little herky jerky and funky casting. But yeah, that's a great question.
Good deal. And we got another question from Amelia. She asked if you can tell them what South Holston tailwaters trout are hitting this time of year.
Well, that's a good question. So some nymphs are going to be good. A buddy of mine the other day was telling me he was doing very well with a nymph is a jig head. So jig head's kind of like that. It's not a straight eye. And this is actually one that the same guy tied for me. It's a articulated stone. All right. And these things are, I don't know where you can find them. He ties them for me. You can kind of look them up on Instagram at Tennessee Cast and Blast or TN Cast Blast. But those, a a nymph with a little yellow dot on the thorax. So right behind the head, once you get in the body, had a yellow patch. They can be good. There's a fly shop up there too, and those guys would be happy to point you on what they're really going after. And then you can never go wrong with just a double fly rig, something with say a sandworm worm or an egg, your attractor up top, something that's got a little color. I'll usually run something with a little bit more size, but just something to catch their attention, and then come off that top fly and then go to a nymph of some sort if you want a nymph, or if you're wanting to fish surface, fish dry flies, just pay attention to the bugs out there. A lot of times they'll eat smaller things than you'll give them credit for, especially on the surface, and it might take going down to a size 20 or 18.
Good deal.
Great question.
And Jennifer asked the question that I've been waiting for somebody to ask so far, and that is, for someone pretty new to fly fishing, do you have some suggestions for some basic flies, assuming they're fishing through the summer?
Yes. So I actually got on, whether it be Academy or your other box stores, you can get a little assortment for like $15. You can get a nymph assortment. You can get a dry fly assortment. You could get a mayfly assortment. It really depends on where you're fishing. And there again, I try to steer everybody towards local fly shops, because if you go in and buy some flies, and especially if it's on your home waters or near where you're going to fish, they're more than happy to help you out. And that's a really great thing to do, kind of build that relationship and get the inside scoop, because they're a little bit more willing to part with the detailed knowledge on fly selection after you spend a little, or as you're spending some money with them. So yeah, just don't let them talk you into spending too much, because you'll get more flies as you go on. One fly I will highly recommend is this guy right here for whatever you're fishing for. It's called a woolly booger, and the woolly booger, you can get a black, purple, red, brown. This one's olive. It's got this brass bead head. It's very effective on trout, brim, bass, catfish. You can catch a carp on it. It's just a great all-around fly. But yeah, beginning flies, just get a little assortment. And even if you do go to that local fly shop, pick some out that they recommend, pick some out that you like, pick some out that are pretty or look neat or look like bugs that you've seen in the area. And then once you get out on the river, it's just, tie and retie till you get that fly that they're hitting on that day. So excellent question. It can be daunting, but just go for it. You'll get the hang of it, and local knowledge is the best knowledge.
Sean, I have a question for you. Let's say, I'm just now myself really trying to get into the fly fishing world and learning a lot more about it. Let's say I'm going up to the tailwaters below Norris Dam. I'm going to go fish the clinch up there. Let's say I get up there one morning early, and it's before they've really started doing a lot of generation, so the water flow is it's pretty low, pretty slow moving water. In a scenario like that, I mean, how much does that influence what fly you're going to pick? Like if they're generating more and you've got a lot more rapid water, are you going to pick a different fly over if they were doing no generation and the water was moving really slow? Like when should you go with something like a streamer that's going to show more movement in the water over something like a nymph that you're kind of just letting float downstream?
Well, that's a great question. So, and I might use the same fly. I might use the same nymph in low water as I would, when that water's ripping. I would just fish it differently. I might have to extend, from my indicator to that fly, and then add some weight in between just to get that fly down. Low water like that, that's a great fun time to fish dries. You can see those fish rise and kind of move towards them. I typically, you got to approach the fish however you can, but if you can, most fish are going to be looking they're going to be facing against the current. So maybe not always upstream if there's an eddy, but more than likely upstream. So I try to come from downriver up towards them if I know a hole I'm going to or see fish feeding actively. Streamers, you know, I really like them, but it's a little different. I mean, you're wearing your arm out, casting that thing all day, and you might get a bite, you might not. I've my confidence is always high doing nymphs, and then throwing dries if they're really breaking the surface. But you know, presentation's a lot more important when you've got that slow water, because those fish are going to be more spooked. They know they're more vulnerable. Any splash that you make slapping that fly down, is going to be very apparent to those fish. So presentation is a little more crucial. If you and you can throw streamers in low water too, but I would throw a really light streamer, and you could throw it with floating line. Just kind of get it to barely dance under the surface, or maybe just kind of wiggle it on the top, just slowly bring it in. But yeah, that's a great question. It's just it comes down to a lot of trial and error. We had a great question last time about when's the best time? Is it when the water's when they're generating, when the water's high? And a lot of it's, I find, especially once that sun gets up, the transition's some of the best time to fish. You don't want to get stuck all the way across a river if you're waiting out there, but that transition's a great time. And yeah, it's not necessarily I'd pick one fly over the other. It's just what can I get away with, and how can I present that fly to those fish to where they're not going to spook and get out of that small little hole or wherever they might be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, good one. Good question, Jed. We got to go fly fishing.
Yeah, I know. You need to take me, show me what I'm doing wrong. So
yeah, well, the clinch, I started on the clinch, trout fishing, just plunking corns and power bait. And then when it was a couple years after I started fly fishing, I finally made it back to the clinch. And that's a fantastic river. I mean, that river's got it all. It's got structure, it's got pools, it's a fun river. So what else do we have?
So we got another question. We got one from Everett. He's asking, so starting out with fishing for panfish, what type of line do you recommend? A floating, a slow sinking, and what are some better flies to use for panfish?
For panfish, I would recommend a floating line. And you could do like a slow sink, kind of a intermediate sink tip line. But I would recommend floating line, because oftentimes you're not going to be targeting very deep. Even if you're targeting crappie, I mean, you can put a 12-foot leader on, and if you're fishing anything with weight, or if you're fishing that fluorocarbon leader, that leader is going to sink. The tippet's going to sink. So I would go with a floating line, and my weight preference for panfish is just probably going to be a 4 or 5 weight line and rod. Flies I would recommend would be the woolly booger again. Instead of having a woolly booger that's long like this, I would get one that's on a shorter hook, just because they do have a smaller mouth. And so a woolly booger on a shorter shank hook. Small poppers are excellent. You can throw hoppers at them. You can throw these guys, these kind of damselfly nymphs, and they are deadly on panfish, especially brim. But yeah, great question. And it's just the trusty San Juan worm, deadly. Some people don't call it or consider it a fly, but it's material on a hook, and it's not scented, so it's a fly to me. And they're great for panfish. Yep, good question.
Good deal. So that's all the questions we have right now. If there's anything we're running into our hour that we set. We only got about 7 minutes left, but if there's anything else you want to cover, Sean or Jeb, with the remaining time.
I had one more question for Sean, just kind of while we're waiting to see if anybody else has questions coming in. I love doing these things because I get to talk with people that know so much more about it than myself, and it just helps me become a more well-rounded outdoorsman as a whole anyway. But Sean, earlier you were talking about if you were wade fishing specifically, and you were trying to get to a certain spot where you knew there might be a fish. When you're getting into the river, are you going to get in typically upriver of where you want to start and kind of work your way down, or are you starting downstream and kind of working your way up? Like, how does that play a factor into how you fish? And I mean, does that change depending on where you're at or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, not so much where you're at. It's just maybe where your head's at. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't care, I'm going. And sometimes the parking lot's here and I just want to get to fishing. So maybe I will fish down. But as you're walking, I mean, one, if you're wearing cleats, you've got cleats on your wading boots, metal cleats, that's going to make a lot of noise. Fish can hear that. I mean, they can pick that up. They can pick up those vibrations along their lateral line like you wouldn't believe. And they if it's any river around here, I mean, they pretty much know what that is. I like to get out early, and when I take the time to plan it out, most likely I'll kind of work my way up the river. Sometimes I'll go around, and I really like to look. I like to kind of sneak up to a pool and see what's there. Oftentimes you can't see as good as you think you can. Fish can hide, even a big fish can hide incredibly well. But I just like to go really slow, kind of ease my way into it, either from the side or from downriver. But sometimes I will. Sometimes I'll fish a pool from upriver, especially if I targeted this pool, and then, oh, well, that one down there looks great. I might actually do a really long drift or let some extra line out and just kind of let the current swing my fly into that pool. That way I can fish it and I don't even disturb it. I mean, they can see very well. They're looking up quite a lot, even if they're not actively feeding on top. Their number one predator is going to be raptors. It's going to be birds of prey. So, or those beautiful blue herons looking to spear them from the bank. So they're looking up a lot. They can see you before you can see them. If you're approaching from downriver, most of the time, if you look at their heads, their eyes are right here, kind of on their streamline head. So they can look out, they can look up, but they can't see back too well. And also, if you're approaching from downriver, with that, if there's any significant current, the mud, algae, all that stuff you're kicking up is going to go down away from the fish, and hopefully it'll. I don't know how well it does, but maybe it kind of pushes those sound vibrations down instead of, letting them carry to the fish. There's a river I guided on in New Mexico called the San Juan River, and it was actually illegal. It was against regulation to fish while you're moving your feet, because that river got so much pressure, and there's so much bug life, there's so much midge life, that as you walked and kind of kicked this algae, this sludge off the rocks, the fish would just come up and they'd eat the annelids, they'd eat the larvae, they'd eat the nymphs. I mean, they just would eat at your feet. So every river is different, but general rule, I kind of get down below and fish up.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Or cut right across from the side. And a lot of times, I mean, these things aren't super heavy. We're not chucking them with a whole lot of weight, especially if we're kind of finesse fishing through these shallow pools. And if you're, kind of squared up with the hole, that'll allow you to make a cast up, depending on the hole size. It'll allow you to make a cast upriver, give that fly time to sink down and get to the fish in a natural way, and maybe fish, the majority of that pool before your effective drift runs out. and then you've got that pressure against the line pulling that fly up to the surface if you're nymph fishing. Or if you're dry fly fishing, I mean, you still need that kind of natural dead drift. So
Gotcha.
yeah, and I still spook fish. I mean, everybody spooks fish, especially when it comes to trout. But yeah, it's good to kind of assess the situation first. And that's what a lot of times, if I can stand it, I won't just go trudging in the river. I'll just sit back, kind of enjoy the view, look, see what kind of bug life's going on, kind of come up with a game plan on how I'm going to attack the holes. And I like to fish near to far. So I'll even once I make it to that hole or that particular run, whatever it may be that I'm going to fish, I like to fish near to far, even if there's a log or rock boulder, whatever that looks better across on the other side. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, there's going to be a fish there. I'll make my shorter cast and I'll drift through, because like I said, you can't see as good as you think you can, and you might pick up on a fish close that you wouldn't have got otherwise, versus casting all the way across, getting that fish that's in the prime lie or that prime area. And then maybe that fight, you trying to get that fish in, spooks the other fish. Whereas, and I'm not saying fishing near to far won't do that, but your odds of being able to maximize your effective time fishing that pool are going to be a lot higher.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're getting close on time. Let me ask you one more fun one, and then we'll kind of just wrap up for the night. So, give you a scenario. Me and you, we're going to go fish tomorrow morning early on the Clinch. We're going to get out. We're going to go try to get some trout, bring them home. You can only take one fly. What are you taking?
Oh man, that's I've got to have this discussion with some of the top guides on the San Juan River, or top guides in Southern Colorado, and that's tough. At the time, I answered because I was a huge fan of this new to me fly called the Sculpzilla, but I'll have to go. My buddy Ryan McRory said he said it best. He'd pick a white woolly booger, and one fly, white woolly booger. He said if you needed it black, you could rub it in some dirt. If you needed it red, you could cut your finger like I did today and just turn that thing red, and you can catch just about anything you want to on it. So a white woolly booger would probably be number one.
Awesome. Well, guys, I sure appreciate y'all joining us again. Sean, thank you for spending some more time with us and walking us through some of this stuff. We're going to be sending out the recording for this one here soon, but also tomorrow, you guys should get an email in your inbox with some additional resources, just kind of recapping some of the things that we talked about tonight, and then just some things that might be helpful going forward. But again, I know a lot of you guys, if you're like me, this stuff can kind of seem overwhelming at first. You don't really know what questions to ask. But as you go out and as you trial and error and learning on your own, send us your questions. I mean, we have folks all across the state that are volunteers that do this all the time. And if you're looking for somebody in your area that you might want to get in touch with, or if you just have questions, send those our way. I mean, we would love to help you guys out. We're trying everything we can just to get you guys out there and help you be successful as well. So we'll be sending out some additional resources, but send us your questions and we'd love to hear them. We've got several other virtual classes coming up here in the next week. We've got one about boating. We've got one about camping. We've got all kinds of other things coming up this summer, but we want to hear from you guys. What do y'all want to learn? What do you want to know about? So send us some suggestions so we can be, better useful to you guys. And these things can continue to be helpful resources that educate people and get them out there. So just let us know what you guys are wanting to learn. Thanks again for joining us tonight. Sean, thank you so much for the help, and we'll get together and we'll go catch us some fish here soon. Hopefully.
Yeah. Hey, I'll keep doing these as long as we've got enough participants. So, and even better yet, y'all come out and volunteer, and you can really pick my brain. So
awesome. Well, that sounds good. Thanks again, guys. Hope to see you on some next ones. Send us your questions in the meantime, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.